Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. Good morning. We are very delighted to welcome you all to the WCU UNDIP International Webinar entitled Media, Journalism, and Politics in Indonesia and the USA, hosted by Master Program of Communication Science, Department of Communication Science, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Diponegoro. The Honorable Dean, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Bapak Dr. Hardiwarsono, good morning, sir. The Honorable Vice Dean for Academic and Student Affairs, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Diponegoro, Dr. Teguh Yuwono. Good morning, sir.
Yes, good morning, Umi. Thank you. Very good today.
Good morning. Yes, Alhamdulillah. And the Honorable Vice Dean for Resources, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Ibu Ika Riswanti Putranti, PhD. Good morning, Bu Ika.
Good morning, Mbak Umi.
Good morning. And the Honorable Head of Department of Communication Sciences, Ibu Hapsari Dwining Tias. Good morning, Mbak Tias.
Good morning, Mbak Umi.
The Honorable Head of Study Program of Master Communication Science, Ibu Nurul Hasfi. Good morning, Nurul.
Good morning, Mbak Umi. Hi.
Professor Craig Allen, PhD. Good morning from Indonesia, Professor.
Hello, good evening from Arizona.
Hey, good evening, good morning from Indonesia. And the Honorable Sir Phillips J. Vermont, PhD. Good morning from Indonesia, sir.
Hai, selamat pagi Mbak. Good morning everyone.
From Jakarta.
Oh, selamat pagi Bapak. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to listen the opening remark. The speech will be delivered by the Vice Dean for Resources, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Ibu Ika Riswanti, PhD. Bu Ika, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Umi. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear Professor, colleague, Vice Dean, Head of Department, Head of Master Study Program, Secretary of Master Study Program, member of the faculty, fellow researchers, and students. Well, I'm pleased to welcome you at the International Webinar of Communication Department, Faculty of Social and Political Science, Universitas Diponegoro, with issue on media, journalism, politics in Indonesia and the USA. First of all, on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty, I would like to convey warm greeting and gratitude to our honorable speaker in these occasions, Professor Craig Allen, Dr. Phillips, and Associate Professor Dr. Teguh Yuwono. Ladies and gentlemen, secondly, the faculty wanted to express its gratitude to the Communication Department as the organizer of these occasions, so that it's expected to be able to contribute to our internationalizations. International webinar, which is a collaboration within scientists, professors, researchers, and experts, both at home university and abroad, which covered multidiscipline, cross-discipline, and interdisciplinary, so that it can add insight and broaden the transfer of knowledge from various perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen, well, it is a high time of political game changer took place in United States. United States as one of the world patronage in democracy, which currently going through a process to determine who will lead in the near futures with various hope in going through a pandemic storm. The USA general election has been always the world attentions because almost all media around the world also highlight the political process that is taking place in United States. And of course, not only American, but also the world citizen are involved in the enthusiasm of the elections. because the United States is currently one of the major power countries whose domestic politics will greatly influence international policy. Due to the absence of the United States in several strategic multilateral negotiations, it is usually difficult for countries to reach an agreement. For instance, TTP, because the President Trump revoked from the TTP, so until now TTP is still ongoing negotiations, and it's hard to get the meeting of mind between the countries. Well, USA elections also have a major influence on changing political communications through what we call as cyber politics. Almost all major of social media platform, also major online media, have their headquarters located in United States. We saw during the previous elections period how the media greatly influenced the winning process of the candidate. Due to the enormous influence of the media, of course, its role is very strategic. It's being able to convey facts correctly and proportionally. So the issue raised in the webinar today is very interesting and very factual, up to date. Therefore, we believe that this international webinar would deliver fruitful knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and students, on behalf of the faculty WCU International Webinar, I wish you all a successful and enlightening conference, and a warm greeting from our Dean to all of you. And thank you. Have a nice day. Buona giornata. God bless. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mbak Umi, now the screen is yours.
Ibu Ika Riswanti Putranti, PhD. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, now we're moving to our main agenda, that is WCU International Webinar entitled Media, Journalism, and Politics in Indonesia and the USA. The discussion will be moderated by the Honorable Mbak Amida Yusriana. She is a lecturer at the Department of Communication Science. She graduated also from Undip. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let's welcome Mbak Amida Yusriana. Mbak Amida.
Okay, good morning. Thank you very much, Umi. Hours ahead. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the WCU FISIP UNDIP Studium General 2020. And today we are gathered here in Zoom meeting to gain new knowledge and get inspired by the speaker under the theme of media, journalism, and politics in Indonesia and the USA. My name is Amida Yusriana, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Today's theme is related to the hot topic several weeks ago. Those I will give you a little bit a short brief about this. Yeah, US had run an election last November 2020, and the results show that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the winner to be the next US president and the vice president. Thus, this seminar today, we're going to discuss the perspective about the political event and the roles of media and journalism from both Indonesia and USA perspective. So firstly, let me introduce our speakers today. So everyone already did the greeting, so I will just call their name. So the first one is Mr. Craig Allen, PhD, for his presentation is about the media, journalism, and the 2020 US presidential election. And then the second one, there will be Mr. Phillips J. Vermonte, PhD, as the Executive Director of CSIS, the abbreviation of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And then his presentation will be about the politics, democracy, and media in the USA and Indonesia. And then the third one will be Dr. Teguh Yuwono as Empol Admin, our beloved first Vice Dean, and he will present about the consolidated or consolidating democracy in the USA and Indonesia. And our last speaker will be Dr. Nurul Hasfi as the Director of the Graduate Program in Communication Undip, with her presentation about the Twitter's roles in Indonesia, in the USA, Indonesia politics, the virtual public state sphere. So opened by a welcoming remarks that we already did, and then followed by speech from our keynote speaker for about 25 minutes, and for presentation for about 30 minutes each. So then we will wrap up by the Q&A session for about 30 minutes right after that. So please remain seated until the Q&A session. So I will explain firstly about the rule of our Q&A session is that for every participant can choose two different ways in asking. The first one is by writing your questions in the chat box, then I will help you to read the questions. Or the second one, you can do it by clicking the raise hand icon below in your Zoom screen, and then I will call you by name and you can convey your questions to our speaker once I acknowledge you. So do not forget to turn on your camera and keep muted during the presentation. So a little bit revision that there will be no keynote speaker, but we will go directly to our first speaker. So without any further ado, I will acknowledge our first speaker, Mr. Craig Allen, PhD, and his presentation will be about the media, journalism, and the 2020 US presidential election. But firstly, let me read his CV. Mr. Craig Allen is an associate professor and associate dean of the Barrett Honors College at the downtown Phoenix campus, and Allen supervises Barrett downtown faculty, leadership team, and 750 students. He also chairs the ASU University Hearing Board, and he is a past president of ASU's Downtown University Senate and member of the University Academy Council and the ASU's General Studies Council. And Allen has written extensively on history, political media, presidential communication, and the international mass media. He has conducted pioneering historical research on Spanish language television. So please welcome Mr. Craig Allen. The screen is yours. Mr. Craig Allen, are you?
Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. I'm ready to go.
Great.
Before I jump in here, I sent a PowerPoint, and is that going to be coming up here? Should I refer to that PowerPoint that I sent?
Where did you send it? Where to?
Okay, Amida, I already sent it to Mas Ardi, and Mas Ardi will operate it.
Okay.
I already sent it to
Okay, great. Okay, we will show it.
Right.
Wait a minute.
While we're waiting for that to get going, it's great to be with you folks again. It's been a long time, 13 years actually since I was there, and it's good to see so many familiar faces here. And Amita mentioned earlier, moments ago, about we, the speakers, hopefully giving some inspiration to journalists, to people, to young people seeking ventures and livelihood in the mass media. I have to say, kind of at the outset, you're going to have to get your inspiration from kind of a different source, because what I have to say here is about a media environment here in the U.S. that is much different than certainly what it was in 2007 when I was there last seeing you, but in fact much different just over the last not 6 to 9 months, where there has been really a landmark change in media activities here, especially the way the public perceives the media. And it's not all a pretty picture, but it is the truth. And essentially, it has to do with the 2020 election. So maybe I can just kind of jump right into that. But I do have a few slides here. To begin, this was an election with a historic backdrop. If we could kind of go back to that previous screen. Can we go back a screen? Yeah. This was an election year that fell by the calendar. We have these every 4 years, but early in the election season, the COVID-19 hit, created massive disruptions in the United States. Then only a couple of months after that, we had some of the most violent, tension-prone social issue going on, what was called Black Lives Matter. You may have heard about the killing of a police officer in Minneapolis by, it was an African-American police officer killed by white, African-American victim killed by white police officers. This triggered probably the worst tension and violence that's been seen in the United States probably in 60 years. So both those two developments were taking place. And in addition to that, we had the incumbent president, Donald Trump, who was a Republican, very unorthodox, very loud, very polarizing. No election in the United States had seen this combination of factors. And another historic event was the turnout. It was a historic turnout, the largest turnout in 120 years of 70%, usually about 65%. Or a 55% or so turnout. Okay, next slide. Okay, and just to kind of reiterate the result of the election, Joe Biden, who was a Democrat, ousted Trump. Biden had 79 million votes, which was 51% of the electorate, and Trump 74 million, which was about 48. It's actually up to about 49%. They've done recounting of things, but it turned out to be a very close election. Okay, that was the main headline, but below that was clear evidence that this was sort of an inconsequential election. The results were blurred, and there is a deep social divide in the United States, much divisiveness going on here socially and in public over a lot of different things, but it's like half the population doesn't trust the other half, and that showed up in the election. First main evidence of that, everyone expected Joe Biden to win in a landslide, which we mean to be a crushing victory of about 15 to 20 percentage point margin over the loser. That didn't occur. Trump did vastly better than anybody had expected. And for a while, it looked like Trump was going to win. But really bigger than that was everybody had expected a Democratic surge, a surge by the Democratic Party, which is kind of the more liberal party here, what we call a blue wave. The Democrats are referred to as the blue political party. And the United States anticipated the sweep of the blue party into all offices. Well, that did not occur. There was no Democratic surge. And in fact, it went the other way. The Democrats actually lost seats in our House of Representatives. They still maintain the majority, but their majority has been cut considerably because the people did not vote for Democrats, they voted for Republicans. And probably the biggest surprise of all, the Republicans kept control of the US Senate. So even though Biden is the president, he will have to face a Senate that's in the control of the Republican Party. And that was a big, huge surprise that almost nobody anticipated. But all of this speaks to the fact that the election was very blurred. Okay, next slide. Okay, much political ambiguity in the political arena, but the direction of the mainstream news media is actually less ambiguous at this time. Going into 2020, the news media was in a fight for survival. They face much difficulty because of social media and really the environment of infinite information that has accompanied digitization, but largely social media over the last 5 to 8 years. The media has been in trouble financially, economically. So that was kind of leading into the election. And then next slide. The so-called legacy media, which is the term here we use to refer to the mainstream media, the media people view as synonymous with the major media. They were wounded, they were pounded by their performance in 2020. It was not a pretty picture for the US news media during this election. And the result of this is what I want to talk about. May have been a tipping point that finally signals the demise of the mainstream news media in the United States. Again, this has been predicted, it has been anticipated, but it could be that the 2020 election could be the event that tips it in the direction of seeing the collapse of the major media. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. Okay.
I think you want to play the next one.
Okay, to sum up, in two ways, the media, mainstream news media, and I'm not, again, not talking about social media, I'm talking about the big reporting services here, shot themselves in the foot. They suffered from a pattern of biased news coverage that really in this election cycle was just unabashed. All parties sort of concede to this, and this is what I want to get into here in a moment. But usually the idea of bias, it's been controversy. People say you're biased, they'll say, no, we're not biased. Well, this was a year when everybody pretty much agreed that there was bias. So want to get into that. And then the second part of this were failed political polls that caused some problem. I'm having some technical issues here, but failed political polls that, if you could just break away from me for, just give me about 2 seconds here to do something here. Let me just. Okay, are we back? Okay, failed political polls. As a result of the biased media coverage that was conceded by everybody, in 1 year, believability and use of the news media has dropped to historical levels, just in a very brief span of time. And we're here 3 weeks after the election. Observers have widely renewed discussion here on whether the mainstream news media will survive. So those are the two things I want to get into here, and I'll move through this quickly because I know we've got a lot to cover today. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's examine the first of these, biased content. Okay, there is no empirical proof of this yet, but the anecdotal evidence of bias in the mainstream news media is absolutely overwhelming. This was a year when, I mean, it was just common. It was just understood. The media were not covering things objectively. Okay, major news organizations publicly pronounced what we call woke editorial positioning. And I don't know if you've used that term there, but woke refers to progressive attitude, socialist, progressive, extremely liberal editorial positioning in what they're getting into. It's the idea that the world is dying and that we need major major rethinking of everything we're doing to save the planet. So major news organizations publicly pronounced that, and that idea of woke was synonymous with the Democrats. It is anti-Trump. Trump stood for the opposite of woke. Okay, so surveys that were going on during 2020 showed that 80% of the 2020 reporting impugned Donald Trump, the president, as lost. Again, he's not woke. He's like behind the times. He's conservative. He's lost in this new environment. And surveys also showed that 90% of the reporting regaled Biden as the woke savior. Even though not very many people here voted for Biden because they liked Biden, they voted for Biden because they didn't like Trump. Biden, because he's the Democrat, was perceived as this person that's going to lead the cause against global warming. He's going to lead social justice. He's going to eradicate gasoline cars. I mean, all these things. Biden was synonymous with that. And the media very much backed that. Op-eds, editorial, what used to be known as editorials, became news reports. They were on the front pages of newspapers. I mean, they were just considered mainstream news coverage. And another dimension to the bias, this display of bias that everybody concedes occurred, is consistent with the news media's likely retaliation to Donald Trump's attacks. You may have heard that Donald Trump was the scourge of the media. He constantly tweeted remarks and messages against fake news. He would single out news media. He would single out reporters. And he was very unkind in doing that. So it was natural that the news media would turn against Trump with biased coverage against Trump, basically because they were, in effect, personally attacked. So all that was evidence of this trend toward non-objective, biased content. Okay, next slide, if we could have that. The result of that was, by mid-year into the fall, was an immense public backlash against the media for not fairly reporting the election, for getting down from its objective pedestal and getting into the mud and evoking a opinion. And that has resulted in this decline of the media as a worthwhile institution in the mind of the public that has just broken out recently. So in terms of the mainstream media, just to define what we're talking about, again, it's good to recognize, and probably some of you are familiar with the mainstream media here in the US, essentially consists of the TV networks, CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, CBS, the newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, local, every major metropolitan daily newspaper is considered a mainstream medium. It also includes magazines. It also includes the wire service, Associated Press. All of those are considered mainstream or legacy media because these are old-time media, the media we always think are synonymous with the news media. Okay, so back to the result. The surveys from about the middle of 2019 to the present show the result. In 2019, about a year and a half ago, according to surveys, 60 to 70% believed the mainstream news media. Today, as of just recently, I have some fairly up-to-date figures on this. Today, 2020, 40% believe in the mainstream media. That is an unprecedented one-year decline. And in fact, if you go back historically, this is the greatest drop in media credibility in the history of the American media. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next couple of slides, what I want to show you are the graphs that that illustrate this. Okay, the first chart here, these were some results from some foundations that have been asking the question, do you believe in the U.S. news media? And this is a chart that traces several different adult population sectors, but I've marked here the total population is the red line there. You can see how it has just dramatically declined in the post-2019 period. And among all adults that are surveyed, who do you believe the U.S. news media? Checking this about a week ago, the result was 40% of all adults believe the U.S. news media, which is a pretty low, frightening figure. Okay, now the next slide shows, subtracts away those who are the Democrats, those who are in the woke, socialist, progressive camp, and it looks strictly at the 65% who are Republicans and independents. That's not the only way that you can divide the one group from the other, but since this is an election year, it's good to just stick with the political identifications. But looking at the Republicans and the independents that number about 65%, you can see that credibility just fell right off the table. Follow again that red line, which shows total non-Democrats. It just plummets as you get into 2020. And the latest figure on those who are Republicans and Democrats, 28%. Basically 1 in 4 people believe the U.S. news media. Pretty shocking. So how was this derived? What was the public here reacting to that would cause them to not want to believe the U.S. news media was objective? Well, if we could go to the next slide. What I have in the next couple of depictions here are some things out of the news media that the American public saw during 2020 that they had never seen before. The first among these are some depictions from CNN. So, I mean, this is a good example. What you need to know, President Trump's history of racist remarks. So there's one example. Next slide. Okay, next. Okay, here's another one, another screenshot from CNN. Angry Trump turns briefing into propaganda session. I mean, you can tell how objective that is. Okay, next slide. Okay, another one from CNN. This is CNN, which prior to this year, people thought was a pretty objective news source, but no longer does that perception hold. This was from breaking news coverage. Headline, Trump refuses to acknowledge any mistakes. Okay, next one. During the middle of the campaign, the fall campaign, I think it was in early October, CNN did a primetime special on Donald Trump's conspiracy theories. So I think that gives you a good idea of the kind of things people saw when they saw CNN. And whether you liked Trump, you hated Trump, nevertheless, you react to the fact this is clearly not objective coverage. It is objective, biased coverage disguised as objectivity, and the people don't like that. Okay, next slide. Here's some newspaper examples. Okay, here's the front page of the Washington Post shortly after the election. And again, you can see some of the things here that the public does not like. The public, which expects the mainstream news media to be fair and objective. Just reading through what you're seeing here, unprecedented. Not quite a straight and objective headline. Then you go below that, Trump hastily departs White House, ending crisis. Somehow the Washington Post believes there was a crisis with Trump as president. And then on the left side, celebrations break out worldwide as the Trump era ends. So if you're looking for objective coverage, you're not going to go to the Washington Post. Okay, the next slide has some headlines I took from the New York Times during the campaign. Again, the New York Times probably over time was considered the most trusted American media, the news source that had the greatest credibility that you could always count on to be fair among political positions, but even the Times admitted that it did not want Trump to remain as president. So, I mean, you can just read through these headlines and see for yourself what the public, again, expecting objective coverage from a newspaper like the New York Times saw this year. And it got a lot of people wondering what the news media really are about. If the New York Times would stoop to this, what about the rest of the media? Okay, now if we could go on to the next phase of what I want to talk about, the second part of this, failed political polls. Okay, next slide. Okay, just to kind of give some background on this. Political polling is the ground and power of the mainstream news media during elections. Probably most of you are aware that the news media sponsor polls and it enables reporting of the horse race, particularly in the United States. As much as the news media report on substance, they report on the horse race. In fact, many over the years have criticized the media for reporting on who's ahead, who's behind in the polls, rather than what the candidates stand for. Okay, now the cost of polling. Okay, if we could go back to that previous slide, the cost of the polling has dramatically accelerated with the proliferation of cell phones and social media. It's one of the things that we're getting into here in academia, where we look at social scientific research like polling and have noticed some major concerns that have cropped up particularly because of cell phones. Here in the United States, telephone surveys were the main source of political polling results. You could get telephone directories, you could define a population, you could take a random sample. It was easy. Now with cell phones, it's illegal to machine dial cell phones. And as you all know, cell phones can be blocked. So the polls have an enormous non-participation rate. And to get over that, you have to pay mass amounts of money to come up with a correct polling scheme. So the media, however, have continued to cement expectations of winners and losers without reporting that the polls cheap and inexpensive sampling. By cheap, I don't mean trash, but I mean inexpensive, that they're not paying the amounts they need to make valid polls. Shortcuts and errors are rampant in these polls, promoting the threat that the polls are not going to be accurate. And then finally, suffice it to say, the public is shocked and appalled when the actual voting differs from the expected results as generated in week after week, if not day after day after day, reporting on the horse race, which in the United States was the headline, Joe Biden is going to win in a landslide. So when things like that don't occur, the people look at the source and they say, news media, why did you lie to us? Why did you tell us something that did not occur? Okay, if we could go to the next slide, what I have here to illustrate what I'm talking about is kind of a projection of polling result. Well, if we could just skip the next slide and go to the first slide showing the 2008 polling results. In interest of time here, I just want to show you how polling in the United States has deteriorated. In 2008, starting in 2008, this was about the time when cell phones were really ramping up. That was like the first year of smartphones. At that time, cell phones had not widely caught on, and the pollsters were using kind of the traditional polling methods. And if we could kind of go ahead and see that slide that shows 2008. Hello? Can you hear?
Which slide?
Okay, yeah, skip to the next one. Okay, as you can see here, this was the result of the election 12 years ago. The pollsters got it right down the line, and they predicted Barack Obama's victory over John McCain. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. In the 2012 election, okay, this is a little kind of scrambled here, but you can see here that, again, the pollsters got it right pretty much down the line, except for one poll in 2012 that has become the harbinger of what has happened since. During the 2012 election, the Gallup poll, which up to that time was the most authoritative poll, predicted that Obama would lose and Mitt Romney would replace him. That, of course, was wrong, and the Gallup poll failed on that. As a result of that, the Gallup poll did not do polling in 2016. Okay, now let's look at the falling off the cliff of the U.S. political polling, the 2016 election, which was the last presidential election. And this is where people's viewpoint of the polls really began to change. So if we could look at 2016, this was a big surprise. The people were not prepared for the result of the 2016 election as a result of ceaseless polling that proved not accurate. So I don't know if we can get to 2012. Can you hear me? 2016.
Oh, okay. Wait, there is a technical problem here for the
Okay.
host. That he's connecting now. There is a networking problem. Wait a minute.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe while we are waiting for the host to be back, so there is a questions actually here. I know that the Q&A session will be the last, so maybe just to fill the time, I would like to ask, there is a questions from one of the member. Ah, wait, we already got back. Okay, so Mr. Craig, you can go on.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, here we go with the 26 polling results. You might have heard 4 years ago, this was a major surprising election. Everybody expected Hillary Clinton to defeat Donald Trump. And of course, that didn't happen. So you go down the list of the polls that predicted Clinton's victory in 2016. You can see that just about every major poll got that wrong. And they got it wrong by, in many cases, huge margins. But a day away from the election, the Monmouth poll was predicting almost a 20-point Clinton victory. The CBS New York Times predicted a clear Clinton victory. NBC, Wall Street Journal, the same. Only the Los Angeles Times and ABC Washington Post predicted that Trump would win. But if you look at CNN, 4 days away from that election, they were predicting almost a 2-to-1 Clinton vote. And of course, as you know, Trump became president. This was what alerted people to major problems with the news media's reporting of political polls. Okay, then finally, if we can look at the results from 2020, from the election that concluded just 3 weeks ago. Okay, the polls got correct Biden's victory. They did correctly predict Biden's victory, but they failed on Trump's narrow margin. And in many ways, the results of the 2020 polls were worse than the 2016 polls, because here, right down the line, they were inaccurate within the plus or minus 3% margin of error. And you just looking at this, CNN 1 day away from the election was predicting 60% for Biden, 37% for Trump. CBS, New York Times, almost the same, 60, 38% victory. I mean, everyone was essentially predicting a 15 to 20 point Biden victory. And as you can see here from the actual vote, the margin was actually 3%. Actually, it's going to probably end up being closer to 2%. So suffice it to say, when the media are telling you one thing and what happens is something else, you've got a huge credibility problem. And it was really spelled out in 2020. Okay, to wrap up, let me just advance here to some implications. So if we could go to the next slide. Is this the tipping point to the media's demise? A lot of people can't conceive of the possibility that there will be no mainstream media. We're so accustomed to thinking of a newspaper. We're so accustomed to thinking of a mainstream television network and the nightly news that it's just inconceivable that there will be no mainstream media. But yet that is what is being pointed to in the United States. Okay, looking at television news, the ratings of television news actually declined during the fall election campaign. CNN's audience fell to about 500,000 people, and that is 1/3 of 1% of the U.S. population. I'm not talking 1/3 of the population. CNN's audience is 1/3 of 1% of the U.S. population. In the cities, local TV news audiences declined 30 to 60%. And Nielsen, which is the major television rating service, reported that on election eve, upwards of half of the TV viewers were not watching the election returns. They were watching Netflix and Amazon instead. So those are very bad signs for mainstream sources of television news. Okay, if we could go now to the next slide on newspapers. Okay, the other pillar of the mainstream media are newspapers. During the election, millions canceled their subscriptions, both to print and online newspapers. The numbers on that are right now being crunched. Now, the New York Times and the Washington Post actually were stable. They are considered, along with the Wall Street Journal, as the only two stable newspapers in the United States. But even they suffered declines, and in the 100 largest cities, newspapers had 10 to 30% circulation losses. The ad agencies canceled about $1 billion of advertising during 2020. Some of that, of course, having to do with COVID-19, but certainly the election and the public backlash against the media's biased coverage of it had something to do with that. And during this time period, the newspapers were pleading for digital subscriptions, and yet across the board, digital subscriptions declined. Okay, so TV not looking good, newspapers not looking good. Let's go on to the next slide here, and I'll try to wrap this up. What has happened in the 3 weeks since the election? Big thing that's happened, the political advertising has stopped. A lot of people are not aware that the mainstream media have declined so much that they actually depend on political advertising that comes in every 2 years when elections take place. Here in the United States, Coca-Cola, General Motors, Toyota, Microsoft, they don't advertise in the mainstream news media anymore. All of their advertising is on social media. So if it was not for this crush of political advertising, the media would have been dead long ago. Why political advertising? Because here in the United States, candidates can advertise in the mainstream media at the lowest possible rate by law. They get discounts, so they just swarm the media with mainstream media with advertising. But so now that has ended immediately after the election. That revenue stream has stopped. Media companies' stock prices have continued in a free fall. This is denying investment. On October 27th, this was about the week before the election, the Salt Lake City newspaper ceased publication. Want to come back around to this in just a second here, but this was a signal event. Salt Lake City is like a top 30 city here. It has about 1.5 million people. It was the first city that had completely lost all of its newspapers. And many newspapers have shut down in the United States, but there has always been one newspaper that has stayed standing because it's gotten the business from all the other newspapers that collapsed. Now in Salt Lake City, there's not enough business for even one newspaper. And so Salt Lake City has no newspapers anymore. Okay, on November 11th, the week after the election, the McClatchy Company, which is a media newspaper-oriented company, went into bankruptcy. The day after that, the Gannett Company, which is the largest owner of newspapers in the United States, announced 500 layoffs. The total layoffs that Gannett has enacted this year is 2,000 out of about a 30,000 total job base. Gannett's laid off 2,000 of what is about 30 to 35,000 total journalists. So you can see that is significant. And that 500 of those just happened the week before last. Okay, next slide. On November 13th, the day after those Gannett layoffs, the Pew Foundation, which is a big public service foundation in the United States that has an interest in the media, issued a report faulting the 2020 polling, just impugned the news media for its poor performance, and concluded by saying that the newsrooms in the U.S. will not reclaim the lost audiences, the audiences they lost in 2020. And then finally, a week or so ago, reports began to circulate that Trump, after he leaves office, will bankroll a new TV network to save the media, to come to the media's rescue. And what he wants to do is run out of business what he calls the failing New York Times and CNN. Okay, last slide, and I am done. Okay, takeaways from this. I think you could say that as a result of the 2020 elections and the news media, the thing that is most frequently talked about is that U.S. journalists are out of touch with the American public. There is no evidence that U.S. journalists accept the fact they have 30 to 40% believability. They're just continuing to do what they're doing with no reaction to these polls that show that the public doesn't distrust them. And further, the journalists do not seem to have any grasp of the fragile state of the U.S. media, that they are oblivious to the threat posed by social media, and are continuing to go along saying, we are the voice of reality, we are the voice of our country, we are the voice of the world. The news is what we say it is, so listen to us. They don't understand they have competition. Okay, the second takeaway, if you're following the United States, and earlier it was said that the United States are kind of a bellwether for what's happening in other countries, the big watchword right now is government bailout. The newspaper companies have a measure in Congress in which they are going to get public tax money to survive. That has not been widely reported. The media does not want that to be known. But their hope is that with Biden as the incoming president, he will persuade $1 billion or $2 billion in tax money to go to bail out the news media. Never, ever before has this even been conceived that the U.S. government would get involved in the U.S. media, particularly in this case where the media, they are desperate for money. They are really on the brink of bankruptcy. So watch that. If you're following the United States, you'll have to dig a little bit, but keep your eye on the news media government bailout. And then finally, on your watch list, the U.S. newspaper industry. This is what you really want to keep your eye on, because the newspapers here, even though that's an old technology, it still is synonymous with the news media. They still have the biggest newsrooms, and TV and other mainstream media are still kind of second in perception to the newspapers. The newspapers are the rock of the news media. Well, as I just mentioned, the newspaper in Salt Lake City has gone away. Some believe this will begin a domino effect, where the closure of one newspaper is going to lead to the closure of another and another and another. It's very hard to imagine what the United States could be like without a daily newspaper, without this center of news media that has existed for so long. But watch this. If other newspapers, if other cities start to see their newspapers disappear, that means that the demise of the news media is underway, that the volcano has finally erupted. Okay, that's it. I hope I haven't taken up too much of your time. not greatly a pretty story, but it's reality. And, if I was a journalist, I would start thinking about how you can get into social media and these other areas. Because at least if the United States is a model, the mainstream news media is not the way to go.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting because I think it's a very local information. I mean, about how the perception of the U.S. people are actually changing just because of the election, the failure of the media to depict the truth of the election. So thank you very much for the presentation. It's a very good information for me and also for the participant. So let me conclude for your presentation. So the 2020 US election results show that Joe Biden has won for 51% over Trump, and then there was social divide in US, and the result of election may have been a tipping point that finally signals demise of mainstream news media. And mainstream news media are biased coverage and failed in political polls, and media proof display biased content, and the result there are public backlash and decline of media as worldwide institution, and it is the greatest drop in the credibility in the U.S. history. Then since the election, the public stopped using the mainstream media. I think that I can conclude for your presentation today. But please stay here with us because we will have the Q&A session for the last. So then next I will go to our speaker. The second speaker will be Mr. Philip J. Vermonte, PhD, as the Executive Director of the CSIS, and his presentation will be about the political democracy and media in the US and Indonesia. But firstly, let me read his CV. Philip J. Vermonte joined CSIS in 2001, and he received his Master of Arts degree in International Studies from Department of Politics in the University of Adelaide, Australia in 2001, and funded by the USA Scholarship. He obtained his PhD in the Political Science at Northern Illinois University, DeKalb, USA in 2012, and he's one of the founding members of the Policy Research Network, or PRORAP, and he is one of the expert respondents of Metro TV and actively contributes to the Jakarta Post and Tempo magazine. And his research interests are on the political parties, election, decentralization, and Indonesian domestic politics. Hello, Mr. Phillips, are you there?
Yes, hi.
Yes, I can see you. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Great. So, Mr. Philip, you will have about 30 minutes to present about your this topic. So the time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. And before I start, I'd like to thank the Universitas Diponegoro for inviting me, especially I think this is a communication studies program to share some thought on the media politics in Indonesia and in the US. But before I start, I'd like to make a confession that I am not an expert on media studies or journalism studies, but I do study voting behavior and how people vote basically. And then I hope that with that kind of background, I could throw in my 2 cents into the discussion. And I think Professor Allen's presentation already has been very expansive on the media side. In the US, and he's clearly more expert than me in this particular topic. But I'd like to approach the problem from different angle. If I treat media as the supply side, then to complement the discussion, I'd like to discuss from the demand side perspective, that is voters, which I'm more familiar with. And I think voters across the globe in the past, let's say 10 years, they've changed. What we've seen and across the globe, not only in the US, but also in Indonesia, the rise of angry voters, in Indonesia, in the US, in Brazil, in various countries in Europe, we see the rise of these angry voters. Who are they? They are the ones, according to some studies, they are the ones who have been left behind by globalization. So, so to speak, it's a quote unquote, the term is not nice, the losers of globalization. That is the ones that was pushed aside by big companies, pushed aside by policies, free trade policies that cost them their jobs. Jobs are shifting away from their countries to another countries that that provide competitive advantage, cheap labor, and so on. So basically, they are left with disadvantage. They are the ones who are disadvantaged by globalization. And this is, I think, the irony, because when the Soviet Union collapsed back in the late 80s, and then some scholars proclaim that this is the end of history, that liberal democracy order prevailed, and then it becomes the only way of thinking about the world. And then the peace dividend were spread out. We see the mushrooming of various free trade platform, APEC, EU become more consolidated. So it's kind of a happy-go-lucky world that we are going to have after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But then it turns out that there are costs of this globalization, especially people with less predisposition. Maybe the ones who are not prepared with competition, not prepared with necessary skills, new skills, but at the same time, no government policies that are helping them. So these are the angry voters. In this kind of setting, of course, then what emerged is the kind of populist rhetoric. So, in the past 5-10 years, we've seen the emergence of these kind of populist leaders, not only in the US. It happens in many places. By populists, I mean those who are appealing to emotion. That for the difficult situations, there's always a blame game that you can play, and so on and so forth. So that's, I think, in essence, what happened in the past 10 years. Angry voters are everywhere. Now, how do we understand this? From voting behavior literature, I think I can offer at least what we have so far in the literature on voting behavior. And there are two big camps, school of thought, on how scholars understand the behavior of the voters. The first one, maybe you are all familiar with, the Columbia School, and the second one is the Michigan School. And then we do have rational choice theory and so on. People studying media, I would say, probably very familiar with this. Now, the Columbia School actually offers a sociological theory of voting. So this school of thought believes that decision to vote is shaped by sociological determinants and socio-political allegiances. Actually, this is not new. This theory was first developed after scholars from Columbia University conducted a study of voting behavior in the 1940s. They actually at the time tried to understand the effect of advertisement, the effect of campaign on the presidential elections. So they are assuming that with massive campaign, people might change their preference, during the campaign. And it was in the 1940s, and then the first one was in Erie County, Ohio, during the Roosevelt-Wilkie presidential campaign in 1940. And the second study, big study that they did, was in Elmira County in New York during the presidential race between Truman and Dewey in 1948. Now, the study found that actually sociological attributes, both at the individual level as well as the aggregate level, were the strong determinants that explain the outcome of the US election at that time. And then they did not really find the effect of campaign. So what they are basically saying is that people already has their political predisposition. So it's within themselves. And then it might be a religious grouping, whether you are Catholic or Protestant in the case of the US, or maybe in Indonesia, whether you are Muslim or non-Muslim, so you already have predisposition. Or whether or not, whether it is about your residence, whether you live in urban areas or rural areas, they have different kind of attitude for voters. I think it's still true right now if I read all the statistics of the US presidential election correctly, and also occupation. So they conclude in the 1940 Columbia study, conclude that being a Protestant from a rural area and possessing high economic status would increase the probability of voters to vote for Republican. That's their first conclusion back in the 1940s. So meanwhile, if you are a Catholic from an urban area, then you are more likely to vote for Democrat. So what I'm saying is that your where you are living, your residence, your religion, and your occupation, might decide what is your preference on during the election time. So deep-rooted predisposition towards candidate or parties are two factors that they think are very important. Predisposition might also include not only religion, but maybe family tradition or social identity. So I think this is what we've seen in the US in the past 10 years. Social identity become a strong predictor of how you're going to vote or which candidates that you are preferring. But then the other school, Michigan school, tried to challenge this, and they did their own study in 1958. Researchers from the University of Michigan conducted a study. They wanted to respond to Columbia study because they think people are actually rational. So, you might have different factors to decide. Campaign might be important, issues might be important, and so on and so forth. So they come up with what they call a social psychological model to offer a new way of understanding voting behavior, especially in the US case. So they said that voters are basically rational. They have partisan self-image or party identification. So they look at the program of the parties and they have affiliation. They build their party identification. In the US, it might be about US policy, US foreign policy, US defense policies, abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, and so on and so forth. So it's basically about issues, not about predisposition, according to this Michigan School of Voting. They reported the study in a very classic study, The American Voters by Campbell, back in the 1960s. And then they basically decompose 6 components of electoral decision: issues, domestic issues, foreign issues, attitude toward parties, and so on. So it's no longer about your primordial background, so to speak. So these are the two big camps in understanding voter behaviors. But I do believe that the two are now need to be rethought because these theories are used by so many of us who are studying voting behavior. This provide a framework for us in Indonesia. These two school of thought, have many followers and so on. But I do think that they need to be updated given what we've seen in the past 10 years. Professor Allen provided a very nice comparison of the failure of the so-called survey agencies in the US, meaning they failed to grasp what has been going on among the voters in the US. So what are the changes? I think number one, of course, media. But number two, I think it's not the mainstream media that changed, but actually the technology and social media. What we are seeing right now is that we are appealing to the psychology of the voters. Remember in the beginning I said it's about angry voters, so it's really psychological. For many people right now, economy is not good. The global economy is slowing down. Your identity is threatened because of globalization and so on. So media and social media is important. We thought that social media and technology in the beginning, I was among those who believe in the beginning that social media would be good for humanity, because through social media you can actually capture the wisdom of the crowd, because everybody can have opinion, everybody can publish their piece, everybody can have opinions on issues. So it doesn't have to be expert to explain things to you, because you can find your own knowledge, through YouTube, to just Google and so on. So why, according the trend, why my opinion is less important than your opinion, or why my opinion, for example, as someone who live in a rural area in Java, should be less important than Prof. Allen, for example, opinion living in Arizona in the US, because people say that I can have the same opinion, or I can have different opinion, I can publish it myself, right? You tweet, you post on Facebook, you have blogs and so on. So I think right now the situation has changed. Social division is exacerbated by social media instead of bringing us closer, because people tend to live in their bubbles. They speak among themselves because social media attract people based on their psychology. Psychologically speaking, people want to hear something that they want to hear. Because of the social media, that's possible. Because of algorithm of these tech companies, Facebook use, for example, algorithm that it will only supply you with the patterns of your behavior on Facebook, who you like, you click like, which advertisement you click, and so on. So then they will provide based on your activities, and slowly then you will be fed by information that fit only your patterns of interest. And I think this is the dark side of algorithm in social media. Now, but I do think the solution itself would come from the tech companies. And I think we are glad to see that now these tech companies also take up the challenge. Before this U.S. election, the previous election, Facebook did almost nothing to prevent people from hoaxes, to prevent people from posting something that promote hatred, promote division. But now they do. They have kind of a mechanism to verify and so on, and they would add link if your post, if they suspect that your post is hoax. And Twitter already did that. You can tweet things, but then they will add a little information that what you post is actually being verified, or what you post is actually different from the official sources, and so on and so forth. So the tech companies now participate in educating voters, and I think this is good, because then people in the past very limited information available. Now we have a lot of information, but lack of verifying mechanism, because as Professor Allen said, usually mainstream media become the verifying place, because they have editorial policies and so on. So information are filtered, being framed, and then being reorganized, and they used to have this teaching of cover both sides, but it's no longer there. Now tech companies use technology to take decision about this various effects, negative effect of social media that affect how people vote in the end. So lastly, what I'm going to say is that about the ownership of the media is also important. In Indonesia, as we know, media are connected to billionaires, but at the same time to political parties or political figures. And this is the problem. We face the same problem with the US that Professor Allen mentioned earlier about the biases of the media, of course, because of the close link to party figures. In the US, it's rather different. It's not political parties, but it's the philanthropists, the billionaires who have their opinions on matters. And they pour in money to grassroots activities, to media. You know, we know Rupert Murdoch. The other day, I read a piece in the Economist magazine about the Koch family, interview with the Koch family. Koch family has been very active. Initially, they thought that it's good to promote, partisanship, so people can discuss policies. But now it goes beyond control. That's what they said, and then they said that probably we took a wrong way. Because I did also think that partisanship is good, because then you can discuss policies, and then you can clearly see alternatives instead of talking about primordial sentiments, religion, ethnicity, and so on. But let's discuss policy and how do we differ, in terms of policies. And the Koch family, I think, apparently thought the same ways. Then because it's good if people have opinions, so people can increase their political efficacies by looking at the policies. But now it goes beyond control, because all hell broke loose because of social media. So I think this is the one thing that I need to end up the presentation with. Number one, all these hoaxes, all these angry voters can be reduced. The effect can be reduced if the tech companies actually really participate. Because talking about literacy is a long way to go. Theoretically speaking, if literacy increase, then we don't have problem. But it takes education, maybe 1 or 2 generations. But if we can find a technological solution, that would be, I think, enough. Thank you for your attention. I return the microphone to the moderator.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentations. It's shedding the light about the changing of the voting behavior, I guess. So if I may say that you before cite 2 schools of thought, the Columbia School and then the Michigan School, and then after that you also explained about the changing in voting behavior, especially since the digital and social media era, and you talk about how the technology actually help in educating the election behavior, and you wish that the technology is needed to get involved more so they can educate people, so they will choose the candidate based on the rationale. So thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Philip. And I heard that you're about to leave. You have to leave the...
Yeah, I need to leave a little bit because there is a meeting that short meeting that I need to do, but I can come back later.
Ah, that's great. Okay, so, but firstly, I would like to ask for all of us to take a picture. Please, everyone, to turn on the camera. So I will ask my partner, can you please stand by to take a picture? Change it into the gallery mode. Okay, so everyone stand by. Maybe I would like to see all of you, your face in this beautiful morning. Oh, I see one of my students, ex-students here, Mr. Bimo Triwijaksono. Okay, so let's take a picture. You ready, Mr. Johan? So, okay, for the first slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so next page. The page number 2, I can see Mr. Sunarto there. Please smile. And then 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there are 4 slides. So the third page, please can you turn on the camera? So I can see Mr. Ricky Arswendi, my senior in bachelor degree. So can you please turn on the camera? Okay, so let's take a picture. 1, 2, 3. And then the last page will be the 4th page. So I see also my colleague, Miss Panundia. So let's take a picture together. 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. Everyone are on the picture now. So for the Q&A session, once again, I remind you that it will be on the last session. So please remain seated here. And Mr. Teguh Yuwono also requested that he's going to leave the Zoom meeting because he has to be, what is that? One of the speaker, right? For the debate of election debate. Is it correct?
Yes, debat Bupati.
Oh, debat Bupati. Okay, so but he's still here with us, of course, until the 11:30, I guess. So now we will go to our next speaker, Mr. Teguh Yuwono. Is it okay? Is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, so the next
Ready.
speaker is Mr. Teguh Yuwono, SM Pol Admin from Diponegoro University and the Vice Dean of FISIP UNDIP. And he will present about the consolidated or consolidating democracy in the USA and Indonesia. But firstly, let me read his CV. Since 1994, he has been a junior lecturer of Government Studies Department of FISIP UNDIP, Semarang, Indonesia, and he has lectured several core subjects such as the Introduction to Political Sciences, Central-Local Financial Relation in Indonesia, and Public Policy. He took his master's degree in Public Policy and Administration at Flinders University, Adelaide, South Australia, and he graduated from doctorate program of Pajajaran University, Indonesia, and his major interests are in local government politics, management and public policy, public sector management, and civil society studies. The screen is yours now.
Thank you very much, Amida.
You're welcome.
Professor Curriculum and also head of CSS, my good friend Phillips Vermonte, PhD. Dr. Nurul Hasfi, head of communication science, master degree, and also Mbak Tias as a head of communication department. First of all, I would like to express my thanks to all of you who already joined in to this webinar. Curriculum. Very happy to see you again. Maybe almost a decade we haven't met yet, but let me provide my presentation on this topic. Distinguished lecturers and students of Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, also students from I think I see many master and undergraduate students across the program studies in the faculty. Let me provide my presentation. I'm not, as Philip also explained, I think I'm not Philip. I'm not expert in media and communication science, but I do believe that media and communication is part of democracy, and I do believe without media, without communication, without political communication, democracy does not mean anything. So let me take and comment my paper on the subjects. So when we are talking about the democratic Indonesian process, what I call as a wave of democratization, the democracy, what we already learned, I think also very much inspired by the US experience. And I think what Craig mentioned about the death of mainstream media, I think also happening in Indonesian politics, because now people is not advertising the political event in the newspaper or in the mainstream media, but they just using social media or even like personal communication like WhatsApp or Instagram or Facebook or something like that. So So this is also influence in our process of democratization. And I think last week also we have a discussion on this kind of whether democracy in the US getting better or getting worse is also one concern in the debate of among political scientists. But when we look at the Indonesian story, I think we concern about the experience, the example, also the practice of democratic process in the US. And I think Indonesia and US share the same values in terms of plurality. I do agree with Craig's explanation that it was a tragedy when he said about the tragedy of a police, black police, which then become a riot in the US because of a matter of racism. And many people also ask about this democratization in the US and also in Indonesia. The question of why a person like Donald Trump, who then attributed as a racist, as also very rude in terms of commenting the racist, the plurality, the domination of thinkers, but still can win the election also in 4 years ago when Trump won the election. And now I think what's already mentioned by Philip is about in the US, when we are talking competition of democracy, we cannot avoid the roles of party identification. Like what many Indonesians ask in the meeting I think the chatting room, asking about why this not good personality of Trump still able to have almost 50% vote. And in terms of in this aspect, in my political view, the election in the US cannot be avoided when you are talking about democracy, talking about politics. There you have to talk about party identification. That the powerful, strong powerful of Republican and Democrat is very close. And I think during the US history, the limit, the gap of on the limit of winning percentage between the winner and the loser is very close. Like what happening now between Biden and Trump, also very close. I think less than, I think very close. I think around 1, 2, or 3% only. And this is showing us that the roles of ideology is very important. This is, I think, we need to learn the experience from US that democracy is not only talking about personality. So when we are talking about election, when we are talking about competition, like in politics or in election, there are many factors. Influence the way how people vote. So maybe somebody would say, okay, media is important. Media will determine people when elect candidate. But you also still need to remember, media is only a way how the advertisement process, the process to approach to influence the voters. But what really happening behind the media is about the political ideology. And what really happening in the US and in the Indonesian politics, that the ideology is important. The perspective on how people behave, how people perceive, and whether people subscribe to one political party or not, also determine in our politics. when we are talking about Indonesian democracy, for instance, Indonesian election, okay, we are influenced by media, but because not only media, you also influenced by personality of the candidate. You also influenced by the program that offered by the candidate. But you need also to remember that the political party who support the candidate also very important in terms of winning the election. Okay, when we back to our democracy, this is what I call it. There are two kind of perception on our democracy and in our democratic perception. I think Indonesia's position now, I think, is very much influenced by the practice of democratization, and in some expert would what do you call it, would perceive that democracy in Indonesia can be classified as a consolidated democracy. I think for sure US is for sure consolidated democracy, even though the conflict there also still happening, the problems of races, the problem of different plurality also happening, but democracy will be able to finish this kind of conflicts, because democracy will believe on the trust that if you can have a simple majority, you will be winning the election. And the point when we are talking about the wave of democratization and the indicator of democracy, what we are now seeing now, then democracy and freedom are closely intertwined, and the quality of democracy is also seen from political rights and civil liberties. So democracy also very close to political stability. I think I do agree with Craig's explanation that even though media, even though the conflicts, there are up and down problems in the US, still political stability is important, because stability is a requirement to produce or to manage your government or governability. So you need to re-legitimation by election, and you also need the progress of democratic consolidation, because democracy need to be consolidated, democracy need to be maintained in order provide more opportunities for the government to implement the policies in order to increase the public affairs. So when we back to the experience of developing countries, when we learn from the US experience, what actually make failure in our democratic developing countries is about at least there are like 5 factors that make developing countries' democracy become weak. The first one is a matter of economy. I think what really happening, economy or poor and low income will influence the practice of democracy and elections. Like what now, I think my colleague also from the US, like Andrew from Wyoming University, my good friend Tom also, my good friend, often saying that democracy very close related to economy, because what happening now, like money politics in here in Indonesia also happening because of this economy. So developing economy and developing politics is two things that need to be focused on. And secondly, the government or the country that poorly governed, experiencing in a mismanagement of government, should be also influenced in the matters of democracy. So what really we need to take note is about the mismanagement, the number of elite become corrupted or corruption sometimes also influence the practice of democracy. And also the fragile government which deal with the primordiality, with the conflict of race, of religion, of politically unstable, also influence how the process of democracy will take place in a nation. And also the fourth aspect related to our democracy, and then this will be worse if then exposed in media or in social media, is related to the concept of prolonged primordial conflict, because this conflict, this also happening, I think, not only in Asia but also in the US, when we are saying about the difference about religions, about races, about different maybe with a region, and sometimes it become primordials, and primordial will influence the quality of democracy. And the last factors also the misuse of executive power. The president also, democracy will not be able to develop well when your leaders, your presidents, your ministers, and your leaders corrupt. We need a clean government. We need clean and strong government. And I think what's really happening, the question after, as Craig mentioned, I think now in the U.S. Society is talking about what's really has to do after election, because election already finished and we need to continue our life. And as a government, what do you call it? As a government mission, the government exists because of the need to improve the welfare quality. And when we are talking about the democracy in the global context, I think we need to learn not only from our experience developing countries, but also from some international countries. Now in 2020, the U.S. Global Democracy Index also not as good as before. Now U.S. In the ranks of 25 of almost 100 countries in the world, and I think I need to tell everybody here and then the best practice of democracy in the world is not U.S. And I think Craig understand this. And almost 10 most democratic countries in the world are in the European countries, or let's say in Western European countries. The democracy, like in Germany and in Sweden and many, I think, and they are able to implement it the welfare state. So not only talking about democracy, but talking about welfare. And this is, I think, the point, because some people would say that Indonesia is only talking about democracy, talking political right, not talking about economy. And I think everybody should understand that economy and politics, economy and democracy should be correlated, because we need democratic leaders in order to improve our economy. Either there is a strong debate which one will come first, whether should be economically good first or should be politically good. I think this is will be depending on the context of a country, but I think there are many experts who believe that democracy and welfare should come in the same era, should come in the same position. Then the people should be supported and provided opportunities to welfare. The last thing that I would like to mention, ladies and gentlemen, the question of whether my main question, whether Indonesian democracy and the U.S. consolidating or consolidated. When we use the Global Development Index, as Indonesia now in the rank of 65, and US in the rank of 25. So almost 40 in the gap between the US and the Indonesian democracy. But we can learn that in Indonesia, in my opinion, in the process of consolidating, even though some expert would say consolidated, like William Leaders and Mujani, saying that Indonesia actually not consolidating, but consolidated. Why consolidated? Because in Indonesia now, no political group threaten and seek to dispose of democracy. All of us, I think, agree to democracy. Our constitution also back up the democracy. No desire to separate Indonesia as a nation state. We believe that we are not disintegrating, even though there are some Islamic fanatic power who wants to dismantle Pancasila, but the number of this aspiration power is not great. So this is when then leaders believe that Indonesian democracy will be tended to be consolidated, and also the great community support that democracy is the most excellent government format. And I do believe this also happening in the US, that democracy should be maintained in order to improve the good quality of governance and finally to improve our social welfare. Indonesian public figures and also political figures are also committed to resolve unbalanced conflicts through constitutional process. I think Jokowi, President Jokowi, and then also the leaders in the US also, I think the US for sure, in my opinion, is a part of consolidated democracy. Even though the conflict happening in the US, but democracy still become a solution to the process of democratization in the US. However, ladies and gentlemen, also there are also several experts like Larry Diamonds who conclude that Indonesia is not consolidated but consolidating. Why? Because performance of Indonesian democratic achievement were already good, but still major threats because there is a power, but in my opinion, it's not great, so great power Islamic Khilafah who wants to dismantle state ideology to be an Islamic state. And secondly, Larry says that military concern for reruling, removing democracy also still happening because of Prabowo and Wiranto. But in fact, I think this is not happening, number two. And also, Larry also say Indonesian democracy is still false, not genuine, because democratization threaten high level of corruption. Number three is okay. I think we believe that our corruption is still not handled well, but the process of becoming strong to be democratic after election 2019, and now we also moving to local election. I think I do believe on consolidated. So my recommendation, my conclusion to conclude my presentation, I think for sure U.S. democracy is consolidated, even though there are a lot of conflict in the U.S. There are of different opinions. There are of a problem of black and white, problem of poor and rich. Still, I do believe in the U.S. Democracy will be a solution to handle this kind of problem. And this is similar to our Indonesia. Indonesia also similar to the U.S. in terms of plurality, in terms of difference, in terms of races, in terms of religion. There are a lot of plurality, there are a lot of difference. But I do believe that democracy, system of democratic system by election, providing more democratic, will provide more result in good welfare. I think that's all. Thank you very much, Amida. I'll give it back to you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. It's a very great presentation. Yeah. So your answer is consolidated, right?
Yep.
Okay. So Mr. Teguh has concluded that Indonesia democracy is consolidated, but meanwhile, and however, there is another perspective that said Indonesia is consolidating because of the various factors. Yeah. So in conclusion, Mr. Teguh talked about the late third wave of democratization, and then Indonesia's democracy post the 1998 is actually improved, and Indonesia is classified as a relative liberal democracy, but it has not shown a consolidated democracy because it has not demonstrated a strong democracy according to democracy indicator. But Mr. Teguh shows us that Indonesia democratic achievement is good and progressing, even though it's still vulnerable. So I wish that Indonesia can achieve better in the next time. So now we're going to go to our last speaker, our lovely Dr. Nurul Hasfi. Are you ready?
Hello, I'm ready.
Okay, so firstly, let me introduce you and your CV to our guests today, for our participants today. So Ms. Dr. Nurul Hasfi is the Director of Graduate Program in Communication Undip, and she's going to talk about the Twitter's role in Indonesia politics, virtual public stage sphere. And Dr. Nurul Hasfi has been working as a lecturer at the Department of Communication di Ponegoro University since 2006 and has been teaching journalism ever since. She graduated from Master of Art in Journalism Ateneo de Manila University at 2007, and she is listed as the member of alumni of study at United Institute, Media and Journalism conducted at Ohio University, USA in 2010. In 2013, she conducted her doctorate program of sociology, UGM Yogyakarta, and graduated at 2017. Besides conducting research about journalism for the last 5 years, Ms. Hasfi has been concerned researcher of social media, democracy, and online political communication in Indonesia. All right, that's about Mrs. Nurul Hasfi. So please, now the screen is yours.
Today, I am going to deliver about the issue of Twitter's role in Indonesia politics. This discussion will be divided into 3 parts. The first is the introduction. The second part is discussion. We will talking about the Twitter in Indonesia politics. I'm focusing in the issue of 2014 Indonesia general election. And the last is the conclusions. So we know that the new characteristic of social media is participative, interactive, bottom-up, democratic, something like that. And it is very different with what mainstream media have. That is right now in Indonesia have a dominating politically and economically, as Pak Teguh and Pak Phillips said before. And I think this is important to questioning of how if the social media is now arrived in Indonesia and it will change the political communication pattern and how people now can speak directly to the elite, and in contrary, elite can speak also directly to the public. Okay, we will again start the introduction with the, let's see, the Twitter user in Indonesia and worldwide. We see that the Twitter user worldwide, Twitter is in a bottom 3. It is mean that it is not popular social media platform actually. Comparing to, for example, Facebook and YouTube, WhatsApp and Instagram, they are in the top 5. In Indonesia at 2014, actually the number of Twitter user in Indonesia is increasing year by year. However, the number is not can be comparable to other platform like Facebook. At 2014, for example, they only have 12 million active user in Indonesia. In 2019, it is also happened when I mean, it is in the context of 2019 presidential election. The number increased, but it is not high. It is only 22.9 million. This is the unique thing. Twitter do not have many users in in Indonesia as well as worldwide. But why it is very useful and why it is used by, why it is very close with politics, and it is always used by politicians during the political event, particularly the general election. The next slide is answering my previous question. Why Twitter popular in politics? One of the things is the hashtags, and secondly is Twitter opens its data. The hashtags, we know that it will show us the mapping of the public opinion. Actually, all social media platform has hashtags, but only Twitter that provide what we call as trending topic. It's really useful for public and also for the elite to know or to describe where is their position in politics. Let's see what happened in the Twitter's role in Indonesia. A little bit theoretic. So I see there are three layers of public sphere, media infrastructure, public, private people, and also communication process. And what I do is on focusing on the last two, the communicative process and the public, because if we consider about the media infrastructure, for example, the Twitter user in Indonesia is only 12 million. It means that it is not public sphere, but I don't want to see that. I want to see the communication process and also who are they who are talking in this sphere. Okay, the method I will very quick in this. Tweets produced by a Twitter's account with criteria. I think this will be useful for you students who are interested to do research about Twitter and social media. This is what the way I do. And I also do it by referring on many research on critical discourse analysis that also do at other countries. I use critical discourse analysis. I don't want to talk about this too deeply. I mean that we know that when we talk about critical discourse analysis, we're talking about text, tweets, picture, video. Text is a social practice. Text is not neutral, and text contain power relation, and this is what I'm going to see in a Twitter text those time. Like for example, the picture here is about Jokowi that's standing beside the funeral of Russian communist leader. It of course has meaning why this kind of text is being spread those time. It is a purpose to attacking Jokowi by using, for example, communism ideology, and it is also using the politics of identity to represent that Jokowi is Catholic as a minor religion in Indonesia. Besides doing the text analysis, also do the in-depth interview. I'm joining the political movement of Mas Jokowi at Semarang. It is for knowing about what happened and for confirmation. I found this a dominant Twitter account, and it is interesting because those time presidential candidate do not do tweets. They just silent. I remember that maybe it is about only one tweet every weeks, and it is not important issue. And then the political discourse were not interactive. Although they are doing what we call as contestation of discourse, of political discourse, they actually do not interact with each other. The network is divided into three groups, party, and then anonymous Twitter account, and the volunteer supporter of both presidential candidate. They speak each other, but they do not doing the network. They do contestation of political discourse. They do not speaking interactively by, for example, replying or something, but they just like shouting each other. Anonymous Twitter is the most active Twitter account at 2014 Indonesian presidential election. The next is volunteers Twitter account, followed by a party, and then another actors, that I will show in the next slide. Before the actors, I want to show you the roles of each actor. The role is different. Anonymous Twitter account only share. They are the one account that share about propaganda, black campaign, attacking presidential candidate. They only this kind of Twitter that have brave to do that. But the official Twitter account of political party like PDI and Gerindra, they do not sharing those coercive political communication. They sharing vision, mission. They doing safe in their Twitter account. And the last is about the supporter of both candidates. In the Jokowi side, they have duty, they have role to countering the propaganda, black campaign, negative campaign that particularly produced by the anonymous Twitter account. And they call it as the sympathetic campaigns this time. So the next slide is about the actors. So except these three group of big actors, there are some other actors like elite and then civil society like mass organization, and then general public like religious leader, public figure, artists, activists, research, and so on. And it is interesting to see how the manipulation of actors were happened those time, except the anonymity of the Twitter account. There are phenomenon of international artists who is joining in the political participation in Twitter this time. Like for example, Sting, he did posting message in the Facebook, but it is also spreaded in a Twitter account. Sting said that use your right, every vote count, hashtag Jokowi 9 July. And the other is Jason Mars. To my friend in Indonesia, this week you are empowered with your vote. Get involved in democracy and be heard. Jokowi 9 July. Prabowo, he gets support from Maradona. Next is communication process. We have what we call a politic of identity. We use religion. Ideal president should be Muslim, should be able to do Rukun Islam. This is Muslim prayer activity like prayer, Hajj, Umrah, fasting, read Quran. So if president do not Muslim and cannot do Salat, something like that, it is not ideal president for Indonesia. And there is also representation of bad presidential candidates, like if they are non-Muslim, in this case in 2014 is Catholic, Tionghoa, Shia, they are bad president. Why there is Tionghoa or Chinese here? Because we still have Ahok, one of Indonesian Chinese politicians that have a strong political power in Indonesia this time. And the next sectarian, we also have ethnicity. Ideal president should be Java, and bad presidential candidates should be Chinese and Tionghoa. And leadership, I think you can see, you can read in the PPT. And it is interesting because at 2019, the ethnicity, the politic of identity focusing on ethnicity is not using Chinese anymore, because Ahok is already not become a politician. He was going to jail this time. And then the politic of identity religion, in this case, the politic of personal piety, like Jokowi can do Salat, Jokowi can lead Salat, become a leader of Salat, of Muslim prayer. It is also found at mainstream media. The next slide is problem. There is a problem from the communication process, the layer. There is from the politic of identity, from the politic of imagology or citra, pencitraan, we found marginalization of a minority. It is endangering the cohesiveness of Indonesian plural society, manipulation of political messages. It is both in actors and content. The actor is like, for example, from the anonymous, and also the supporting from international singer, we do not know what is their interest because after that, after the election, they are just disappear also. Maybe it is what we call as influencer right now. So the Twitter provide more space for public for doing political debate on Twitter during 2014 Indonesia presidential election. Actually, it gives us, of course, provide to interact each other. However, there are tendency that Twitter facilitating coercive political communication, in this case manipulative network, and then the next manipulative content about the politics of imagology or the politics of identity. I think it is clarify what Manuel Castells said about the two actors who have power in the network. The first is switcher, in this case, IT person who have access in it, and the second is programmer, them who become the content of political designer. A little bit prediction how the roles of Twitter in the next general election. There is a new trend in Twitter about social network analysis, big data analysis. This become a double-edged sword, depend on the actor who have access and operate this technology. It has a relation with what I call a switcher who control the network, and social network analysis become tools that might decreasing the process of democracy, but on the other hand, it can increasing the process of democracy. But the tendency of what happened right now is Indonesia is the social network analysis or big data analysis is using for manipulating the public opinion. This is example of how the social network analysis is using for increasing the democratization. It shows us how the switcher can manipulate the network in a social media, so they can manipulate the public opinion in a Twitter. What we call as giveaway to make a network for showing that the Undang-Undang KPK is supporting by public. So who have access to technology will winning the contestation of power. Them who have power, like money, knowledge, position. The important thing is the last one. There is a tendency, the domination of a strategic communication logic, the success and winning orientation of political communication in the Twitter political communication. And it is endangering democratization. Example of the Omnibus Law, Jokowi government political communication dealing with this issue is intransparent, exclusive, and close to public debate. All knows about this. It also has tendency, didn't involve important actors like labor organization, environmental organization, etc. And it has a huge protest. A huge protest happened or offline and online, but the House of Representatives passed the bill and Jokowi already signed it. And I think the first point is there is a tendency that government now feel that they have a direct communication to public, and they ignore what we call as civic society that usually become the mediator of the political communication. And this is what happened of the Omnibus Law discussion on Twitter. The total mention is increasingly at 24 February until 23 March. And then after that, the number of tweets about the Omnibus Law is become stable and very low. It is mean that maybe they seen this kind of data, and then they feel that public has no power, maybe exhausted to against this Omnibus Law. So to pass the bill is a safe policy for them. And on the other hand, civil society organization actually loudly protest about this until right now, but government refused to respond it seriously. So it is mean that they are trying to ignore what civil society organization trying to say, and the government just see of what happened of the public opinion are were shaping in the social media. The last slide. The illustration is showing that we Twitter still is a public sphere, but there are the state power are trying to co-opt what public sphere or what public have by using technology and then manipulate of what happened of the conversation happened in a Twitter. Okay, thank you very much. Time I give you to Amida.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Nurul Hasfi, for your presentation. I think it's part of your research, right? Is it? Yeah, so you choose to be, you talk about the optimist one and the pessimist one about the Twitter roles in the politics, and you stand for the pessimist one first, and then you found out about the new layer about how Twitter works, and it's like a very intriguing presentation because it lets us rethink about our behavior in using the Twitter, and especially when it relates to politics. We have to be really, really careful and also not to produce a new content that can make the content information bias or make a hoax bigger. So thank you very much. Now we go to the last session, and I will keep it very short because we already exhaust the time. So there is a firstly, I would like to remind you that you can write in the chat box, or you can ask directly by raising hand. But actually, I got a lot of questions from the chat box, and I don't think that I can read every of the questions. So I will choose several questions for this. Yeah, the first question is from Mr. Sunarto, our very eager to study, one of our colleagues that always eager to study more and more. He's very inspiring persona. Mr. Sunarto, are you here? Yeah, so he asked to Prof. Craig Allen, he said that it is very interesting topic, and I have read about Trump in our media. It seems there are negative opinion about Trump related to his personality that do not receive his loss in the election and spread hoax about his claims related to election fraud without evidence. And my question is, why do still many people in US vote Trump? Professor Craig Allen, that's the first questions for you from Mr. Sonato. Can you please answer for that?
Was the question, why did people vote for Trump?
Yes, yes. Though they know that Trump has, the media has built a very bad personality about Trump, and why did they still vote them? What do you think about it?
Well, I think the best answer is what we heard earlier, that the people in the United States and globally are not a happy people. And when Donald Trump emerged in 2016, he articulated that. And he's a non-politician in a country, the US, where people really don't like politicians. He spoke of things, of themes and issues that in many ways were taboo. He brought them forward. He stood against a brick wall Washington, D.C. establishment that people in middle America absolutely hate. And, you know, I would say there really should be no surprise to anybody why not only did people vote for Trump, they voted for Trump in waves. Half the American population still is behind him. And if you think otherwise, it's because you're reading too much of the New York Times and the Washington Post. But I mean, if you go to rural America, middle America, the suburbs where I live, Trump is much adored. And I sort of feel the only thing that precluded him from winning was his bad manners. He's arrogant, as I was saying earlier. He's divisive. He's loud. And I mean, that's what you get from somebody who was formerly a celebrity game show host on national TV. But if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for his bad manners, I am convinced he would be.
Ya udah, nanti saya aja lah semua termasuk double yellownya. Oke, siap.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, just to wrap up, I would say, and I'd make 2 points. Again, the sentiment here, backed by those political polls that I impugned earlier, but nevertheless, the feeling is consistent that people in the United States did not vote for Joe Biden. They voted against Donald Trump. The other thing I would say is they came out with Biden's approval, his first approval ratings as president-elect last week. And they were something like 56%, and Trump's approval ratings were 54%. So they have almost equal approval. Biden's approval as an incoming president is extremely low. And again, it's because so many people like Trump.
Okay, so Mr. Sunarto, is that enough? Are you here?
Enough, I think. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, Mr. Allen, there is another questions for you. We'll choose this one. From Hima Ulya to Professor Craig Allen, I really interested about this topic since Trump won election in 2016. Lately, I interested about FOF, the firehouse of falsehood. As I know about the issue is Trump using this strategy in 2016 election. And my question is, does media mainstream involved in FOF or strengthening the FOF? You're still muted. Your audio is still muted. Sorry.
I'm sorry. You'll have to educate me on that. Was it FOF? And what might...
FOF. The FOF. Okay, wait. I will. Miss Hima Ulya, are you here? Hima Ulya, are you here? I don't think she is here. So the FOF is a technique of the Russian propaganda that the media will give information even though it false, but they give a false information or right information. They continuously keep it to the people until the people believe in it. I think that's that I can say. I don't really get it. So
if that's what that means, now I don't agree with that at all. The media have lost their credibility in the United States. The idea that there is this big, powerful, monolithic media doesn't exist anymore. And in fact, what I was trying to say is that kind of media is in decline. But to directly answer that question, the reason why Donald Trump got his message through in 2016 was his extensive use of Twitter, was his use of social media, not just to communicate directly to people, but to set the agenda in the mainstream media. But, in no way would the mainstream media here have exert any influence anymore, and certainly not in favor of Trump.
Okay. So thank you very much for that. Miss Ulia, are you here? The one that asked us? Oh, she's not here. So I think I would like to ask for Miss Vermonte. Is she here? No. So Dr. Nurul Hasfi, are you still here with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, there is a questions from Mr. Budi Purwanto. He asked about, could you please share about the theoretical case has run out here at Indonesia about the propaganda in between FBI with the central of the ideology led by Mr. Rizik Sihab versus the government of Indonesia.
Question is in the chat.
Sorry?
Is the question is in the chat?
Yes, you can read it. Can you please?
Amida,
yes.
I will prepare for the answer, and please, there are a lot of questions from for Mr. Craig that you just go with the Mr.
Okay. So because Miss Hasbi will answer it in the chat box, so and there are actually a lot of questions for you, Professor Allen. So I will give another questions for you. There is an interesting question, very simple one from Miss Nurul Hasbi herself, and she thought that she thinks that based on your presentation, is a gloomy future for the journalism, and it also happened in Indonesia actually. And a simple question for her is, how do you think about the future of journalism in USA?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. The mainstream media are on death's door. If your plan is to be a journalist in a mainstream media environment, you're going to be severely challenged. Here in this country, every newspaper, every television network, every station group and TV channel, every magazine is financially stressed, and they're laying off people. They're putting people on furloughs. That would not be a very prosperous area. On the other hand, if you can do journalism on social media, or perhaps develop a website, develop an enterprise, develop your own YouTube channel, something like that, that's where the future lies. But if your intent is to be one of these journalists that just falls in step with the other journalists, let me work for the New York Times, let me work for whatever newspaper, you raise the money through advertising, you pay all the money, and I will do all the writing. Those days are over. There are no media institutions that have that luxury. So, yeah, I mean, if all you think about is the mainstream media, you're going to have problems because the mainstream media are evaporating. But if you can think more in terms of the newer technology, that's where journalism's future exists.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. So mainstream media suffer, yeah. Meanwhile, the social media becomes a new way or platform for people if they want to work in journalism, for example. So there is one more questions. I will think it will be the last questions. Thank you, Mr. Craig. My name is Islam Karim. In my opinion, Biden was not a strong competitor against Trump, but he was a weak competitor, and Trump appeared more attractive when speaking and stronger than his media appeal. But why did the American voter choose him?
Like I said before, they voted for Biden because they didn't like Trump. They did not vote for Biden because they liked Biden. Pure and simple. And I think those figures on his approval rating show that. Usually an incoming president has 70 to 80% approval rating. Biden is coming in with 55% approval. They voted against Trump, and that was the story of the election.
Okay. So that's the answer from Professor Craig Allen. And there are actually a lot of questions, but unfortunately, because the time is up, so I have to close our Q&A session today. And this is marking the end of our Q&A session today. And I would like to conclude our webinar. In conclusion, there is a new phenomenon happened in USA because of the mainstream media drop in the credibility, and social media becomes one of the helpful platform both in maybe USA and in Indonesia for journalism in talking and educating about the democracy and also the election behavior. So I think that's all for our special webinar today. Thank you very much, Professor Allen, for coming here and give us information. And then thank you for Dr. Nurul Hasfi. Are you still here? Thank you so much. And then Mr. Vermonte also, if he is not here, and Mr. Teguh Yuwono that already left. So thank you very much for our speakers. You shed the light for our perspective in this topic. Yeah. So, and thank you very much for all the participants. Yeah, I think that's all for the special webinar today. And also thank you for the committee in here and honorable guests and everyone involved in this webinar. And I am Amida Yusriana. Thank you very much and have a nice day, everyone. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.